Welcome to episode 67 of the Gambots podcast. I'm your host, Eric, and this is my co host.
It's Christian.
On this week's episode, Christian and I will be talking about the Netflix original documentary series Tiger King. Gamestop has been in the news lately, and then finally, Christian and I will talk a little bit about what we've been binging during the quarantine. But first, Christian, you and I both have started watching Tiger King, which I think came out of nowhere, and it actually sounds like a lot of the country is watching it right now. I saw some article that said, according to IMDb, this is like the most streamed show right now because it's just so insane. Everyone's getting into it.
Yeah, I have no trouble believing that.
So, for anyone who doesn't know what Tiger King is, it is this documentary that the creators of it seemingly fell into this story, where they found a very how would you describe Joe Exotic, Christian?
Eccentric?
Yeah, a very eccentric, uh, gay, gun-loving Oklahoman who has hundreds of tigers that he runs a zoo. And then it gets into his story, and then also while they're filming, he gets involved in a murder for hire plot, and you also get a look of different big cat owners throughout the US and also another big cat owner who potentially murdered her husband. So
Yeah.
it's crazy.
Yeah, so I think the biggest thing I had to grapple with was the fact that they started filming this before it got crazy. I mean,
Oh,
it was always pretty crazy, but like they started this whole process of filming this before like he ran for governor and president and before he said that maybe that guy to murder that woman, and they were just like, "Oh man, what have we gotten ourselves into?"
Christian, when I say they fell into this, I'm pretty sure they mentioned that they started this documentary. They were just filming some dude who was selling snakes in Florida, and then a buyer came and was like, "Yeah, I have a snow leopard." And they're like, "Wait, what?" And then he's like, "Let me introduce you to some of my friends." And then they started following like the big cat owners. And you're right, they started filming Joe Exotic before he was really going off the deep end.
Yeah, it was. You're right. Like they absolutely were just like, "All right, well, I guess we're gonna do this for a little while," and man, look where it led.
The problem I had a hard time differentiating too was they weren't the clearest on the time frame of everything. They started filming at the very least those snakes. I think it was 2013, and all the crazy stuff with Joe Exotic going to jail and stuff didn't happen until I think 2018. But Joe Exotic, who sorry we keep saying this name, Joe Exotic is the primary character and the focus of this documentary. He's has a mullet, two toned, and
Truly wild.
he was like filming everything for his internet show. So I don't know how much of that was like footage that they previously had, but they had mentioned like when their one of their buildings burned down, they lost all their footage. So I was a little bit unclear if all the footage we're seeing is from the documentary makers or if some of this was his.
Yeah, that's true. At least some of the people they were interviewing looked like they like the campaign manager they had clearly interviewed two different times. So it seemed like at some points he was younger and at some points he was older and talking about in retrospect. But most of the people, it seemed like they only did just the one interview. So I'm not really sure where on the timeline those interviews happened.
Yeah, I they definitely at least had I don't know how far apart, but because a couple of those guys were filmed in different locations, so you know they had more than one interview. But yeah, unless you knew the total story and kind of could piece together where they were on the spectrum, it was hard to tell what year they were talking about. And like when they're talking about Joe in this year, had he gone to jail yet? Like it is a little bit confusing.
Yeah, so I mean, I don't want to. Man,
We have to
I
spoil a Christian. I
I
mean,
don't
there's
even know.
no way
Well, yeah,
to.
I was gonna say I don't really even know how to attack this because it's so much all at once. But while we're talking about the variedness of the interviews, they interview somebody in a bathtub at the end for sure. He's just sitting
Oh
in the
my
tub with his
god!
clothes on,
Why?
and
What,
then
dude? when that came up, no idea why that was like was the guy like you could film me, but I'm getting a bath, so you gotta come in there with me.
But he still had all his clothes on.
No
Like I think he
idea.
was shirtless, but he definitely still had pants on. And then the other guy, one of Joe's several husbands that we meet, spends all 7 episodes just chilling without his shirt on.
Yeah, I mean he's comfortable in his own skin.
I guess.
My guess, Christian, is that these guys were around them so much that they just became used to them to a certain extent. Well, not the guy in the bathtub. That did seem like, but Joe's one of Joe's multiple boyfriends. Like he seemed to have known them pretty well, and also he was at one point a heavy meth user. So I assume that messes with his caring of being shirtless on film.
Yeah, it seemed like they all were at one point or another.
Yeah. So let's give a background on this first. So Joe Exotic runs the GW. So it's the Greater Wynwood Exotic Animal Park. They just call it the GW Zoo, which has a bunch of big cats you can pay to take your picture with cubs and those kind of things. It's in Oklahoma. And the primary crux of the first half of this is it follows him getting in a fight with another big cat rescue. Well, it's called Big Cat Rescue, run by Carol Baskin, and it's basically them bad mouthing each other because she doesn't think he should be open. Is aligned with PETA because he's breeding cubs and stuff, and he thinks she's just taking advantage of everyone as well. So I'd say the first 4 to 5 episodes really focuses on the first 3 episodes really focuses on their fight, and then the latter episodes obviously once he goes to jail.
Yeah, so they're like the two primaries in this. Is the whole crux of the show basically hinges around their conflict and relationship.
Right. And then while the main story is that conflict, they also go into you meet some other owners of big cats who have zoos and stuff, and then you start to get a lens of people who work in these places and really like are they good people, are they bad people? I thought the most interesting part really was you meet Doc Antle, you meet Joe
Oh
Exotic,
boy.
and you meet Carol Baskin, and how they keep these places running because they spend I think Joe Exotic said he spends $250,000 on food, and Carol Baskin said she is spending closer to like $500,000 on food. And really, they all seem to be, at least from the documentary's point of view, some form of, at the very least, taking advantage of people, and other people just being like abusers or cult like.
Yeah, so Doc Antle at one point says that he spends $10,000 a year feeding each tiger
Right.
individually.
And he has 100 plus tigers.
Yeah, he had something like 200 some, I think.
Yeah. So a lot of money on him. Joe Exotic said he could feed an animal on $300,000, or sorry, on $3,000. But that's also him going out and hunting, and also these poor cats. He's feeding them the Walmart discount meats.
Using the Walmart meat.
Also paying his workers in Walmart meat.
Yep. That's a normal thing that you do.
Yeah. So everyone in this movie is pretty insane. Let's start with Joe Exotic's workers because when I say they're like a cult, I really mean it. There's a girl who, while they're filming, loses an arm to a tiger and goes back to work in 2 days because she doesn't want it to hurt the zoo.
I gotta say, I respect that.
That work ethic.
Yep. It's bold. Like, okay, and it shows him walking back into like the gift shop, and he's like, I'm gonna be honest with everybody in here. One of our employees just had her arm ripped off by a tiger. If you guys want a refund or if you want to come back some other day. And I'm like, what?
I mean,
Get out of there.
he's nice. He's like, hey, I'll refund you. A lot of companies you get the rain check only.
Yeah. Oh my
No,
goodness.
the best part of that scene, and it's horrible for that girl, But once it happens, Joe Exotic goes and gets an EMS bomber
The
jacket.
EMS bomber jacket.
He's not
Absolutely flawless.
EMS. And wears it.
Absolutely flawless. Oh man. And like and they interview her and she's just like, yeah, man, I wanted, I knew that the longer I stayed away, the more this would be like a big scandal, so I just told him to cut my arm off. And 7 days later, I was back at work, and like, what is happening?
Yeah, well, that's the thing is like all the workers he seemed to prey on and praise. He gave people jobs and stuff. I get that, but he seemed to target people who were down on their luck. So it was either people who were drug addicts, they had nowhere else to stay. He would basically give them a place to stay to work at the zoo. So in that regards, like that's I guess that's a noble effort, but at the end of the day, he did it to exploit them, and because he helped them when they're down on their luck, they seem to have a huge reverence towards him until the end when he started really going off the deep end.
Yeah.
I would actually say, though, of the three main people they follow, Joe Exotic, Doc Antle, and Carol Baskin, Doc Antle was probably the worst as like grooming people because he would groom 17, 18-year-old girls from young ages to basically join his harem.
Yeah, I mean that was a full-on cult. The Joe Exotic situation, like you said, it just seemed like he gave these people a chance, and it was exploitative, but it wasn't like, I mean, at least how I read it, it wasn't like active cultiness. Whereas
Right.
as
He
soon as they,
didn't use, well, except for his polygamous relationship with his two boyfriends, he didn't seem to target people for sex other than those two, I guess.
yeah, but as soon as they got started diving into Doc Antle's whole situation, my jaw was hanging open, and I was like, "This is a cult." And then like 30 or 40 minutes later, they interviewed this one person, and they're like, "Oh yeah, no, it's definitely a cult."
Yeah, I actually think Doc Annals the worst of all of them. And granted, Joe Exotic was in that like murder for hire sting, but with Joe Exotic, like you know what you're getting. Like he seems to be pretty upfront about everything. Where like Doc Annals seems like a snake in the grass, you know?
Yeah, his ooh. Well, I mean, it did close with them saying he got raided like last year, I guess.
Oh yeah, I see if something comes out of it. I mean, it seems like he's probably. What bugs me is
Tiger King season 2.
right, Doc Annal. The problem is like not only like are these guys exploiting tigers, I think the bigger issue is that they're breeding them for their own gain and then killing them once they become too much of a burden. It's heavily implied that they're doing that. They never come out and say it, but I think that's just so bad, you know?
Yeah, it seems like that was his bag. I don't know how much uh, Joe and Carol were getting into that, but that is absolutely what Doc Antle is accused of. Is after like 12 weeks when the Cubs aren't making money anymore, he has them put down.
Yeah, I would say Carol probably has the most humane business plan where she doesn't breed them. She's trying to get cub breeding outlawed. And she's basically just rescuing cats. And granted, it's arguable if she has a good zoo or not because Joe Exotic's like her zoo's horrible, but he's clearly biased. So the issue with her really comes down to it turns out in like the 90s, her then husband, who was going to divorce her, disappeared. And it's again heavily like the movie makes it you think that she killed him.
Yeah, so I guess the first thing I want to get into with her is that she was so like up on her high horse about these zoos and they were making money off these tigers and exploiting them, and I was like, yeah, I mean, I can get behind that message. Like that's crappy, and you definitely shouldn't make money off of these exploited animals. And then like 10 minutes later they were like, and here is Carol's situation where she is making money off of these tigers that she has.
Right. I mean, she seemed once she got the money, she seemed to do a complete not 180, but like her position change where she's like, well, we shouldn't be breeding these. Like I can see people change their opinions where the footage towards the end you see of Joe Exotic, his initial stance was like, you should not breed cubs and blah, blah, blah. And his zoo actually started out as a sanctuary like Carol's, but once costs mounted up and the ways to get money were with cubs and he became more addicted to the idea of being famous, your priorities change a little bit.
Yeah. I just couldn't believe she was so like so up in arms about they're making money off of these tigers, and then it turned like I genuinely they make it seem like at first like she is just running like a not-for-profit sanctuary where these tigers hang out,
Right.
and like they can't be reintroduced in the wild, so like we make them as comfortable as possible and then they die and that's that. And then she's like, all right, and the gates are open and the lines are long and like this is how much it costs to get in. And it was like getting slapped in the face.
Right. And that's I think the biggest problem with her is she's not likable. And that's like Joe's biggest boon is he comes off as relatively likable and affable in the documentary, even though he's probably, well, who knows if Carol murdered her husband or not, but he comes off as like the better, like who you would rather hang out with, right?
Yeah.
Where like her whole thing, like if she came up, she's like, look, I started out in this doing this, and then over time, like I realized this isn't the way we should be treating cats, like it's humane, blah blah blah. Like she tries to like cover up her past or whatever instead of being like, yeah, like I know about this, that we shouldn't be doing this.
Yeah. Well, let's dive into the possible uh murder situation
Yeah.
with her second husband. So that's another thing. All these people have been married so many times. You never meet Carol's first husband. He's kind of brushed aside as being
An
abusive, and she
abuser,
left
yeah.
him. And then she meets her second husband, who is coincidentally very wealthy. And then when he gets tired of her and wants to file for divorce, he vanishes.
Under very mysterious, he disappears. They find his car. They don't dust for fingerprints. All of his associates were like, yeah, he was going to divorce her. His attorney's like, yeah, I never made a document making her power of attorney. It was his assistant and all this. And then it's like it seems like she forged documents and just, yeah, crazy situation where even if he just disappeared, like she did some weird stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really shady. Like everything they say about it is like no, no, no. And yeah, I really went down the rabbit hole on that one, and I was totally sucked in.
Yeah. The way she acts, like she comes off as so fake that, and
Oh yeah.
she has like a canned response for everything, and that just might be because she's been asked these 100 times. But the way she's like, okay, here's the explanation for this, and it's just like, do you really have an explanation for everything? And like, she just doesn't come off as genuine, so it's hard to believe her.
And every time they ask her, like anytime her husband gets brought up, and she just kind of laughs about it, and
Right,
it's like, Carol, did you kill your husband? And she's like, ha, 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 no. And then they just move on.
right. Yeah,
It's
it,
very strange.
yeah.
They, I did see a news article today that authorities down in Florida are considering reopening the case after all of this Tiger King stuff has come out.
That's hilarious because wasn't that Joe Exotic's entire thing was
Yep,
getting the case reopened, but also and then it just turned into antagonizing her.
sure was.
Yeah, and the other thing too is like why I find it hard to believe her is she tries to act like she's better than everyone else, but she exploits volunteers the same way these other guys exploit their employees. But the other guys, at the very least, like Joe Exotic, is paying his employees. Granted, it's not that much, but he is paying them. And
Yeah,
her entire thing is like she relies on volunteers, hundreds of volunteers she gets because she has the more noble cause. But
and her
even
thing,
then, like it doesn't seem like she has employees. She was like, "Yo, if you're volunteering on Christmas, you got to show up." Like you're really making volunteers do that,
and her thing was even kind of cultish too, because she's like, oh, and once you've been here so long, you graduate and you get a green shirt, and
right?
if you've been here so long, you get a red shirt, and it's like, is this martial arts? Like, what's happening here? And
Right?
the
Yeah.
people are like, oh, I'm so proud that I have my navy blue shirt after working here for whatever 15 years, and it's like, My God.
Yeah. And so, uh, I don't think she's entirely without fault. And she's clearly has it out for Joe Exotic too, not to the extent he did for her, but she targeted him trying to shut down his zoo, and that's kind of what led to everything happening. Uh, well, I don't want to blame the victim on a murder for hire, but it seems like they antagonized each other, and Joe Exotic took it too far when everyone's like, "You got to calm down, man."
Oh yeah, every single person in this show is a villain. There is literally no one in this show that you can find yourself like happily rooting for.
I would say like Joe Exotic's workers for the most part were fine. Like they're not the
Some
best
of them.
people, but
I guess
like
Saf, the
the
girl
one
who had
who
her arm
lost her
ripped
arm.
off. Um,
Yeah, and I was kind of thinking like they all dislike each other, but you're right. It's not someone where you're like I love this person.
yeah. Yeah, I would say Saf and like the campaign manager who they interview twice.
The girl who
They're
was in a cult who got out, she was fine.
Oh yeah, she's good. She was one of my favorites.
Yeah.
Honestly, I think my favorite character, and I mean I say character because I can't honestly grapple with the fact that these are real people.
Right, they're
um,
larger than life.
but I think my favorite figure in this entire show was Mario, the Miami drug kingpin.
Oh my gosh, I forgot they have a drug kingpin who like possibly Scarface was based off of. It's like he's in an episode showing off his pets.
Like episode 2 is where it's at. That's where you get the deep dive into Doc Antle's weird sex cult. That's where you meet Mario the drug kingpin. That's where they drop the bomb at the end where Carol may have murdered her husband, and like the documentary crew didn't know about it.
Right, they're like, wait, what?
Yeah, the guy's like, oh yeah, and then her husband disappeared, and the guy behind the camera's like, wait, what happened? And then go back to Mario, and he's like talking to somebody over his shoulder. He's like, oh yeah, it's a true story. Her husband just vanished.
Into thin air.
But yeah, like this guy is like, oh yeah, I used to be the biggest drug kingpin in Miami. Like you said, they think maybe Scarface was based off of him as a real person. And then he's just kind of casually talking about how him and his gang like murdered an ATF agent. And like,
To be fair, he said he didn't murder him. He was just there when they cut off the body.
yeah, right. And so it's but just the way he talks about it is like talking about what he had for breakfast that day. And like I had to do a double take where it's you can't possibly be talking about what I think you're talking about, but there it was.
Yeah. So as this movie progresses, the relationship between Joe and Carol gets more antagonistic, and he releases a daily internet show where it's just thousands of hours of him basically hating on her. Like the DA or when they prosecuted him had to have been like, we are going to slam dunk this case because we have him shooting her, like taping her face to blow up doll, shooting it, being like, Carol, if I ever see you, I want to shoot you in the head. All this stuff on video that he stored. But what they got him for originally and what Carol almost initially shut down his zoo for was a copyright claim because he created her thing was Big Cat Rescue. He made Big Cat Rescue Entertainment and had like the same letterhead and stuff as her and just started using it to get like people who are looking for her to come to his site instead, which I think is hilarious as to
It
that's what initially almost killed the zoo.
it was incredible. Like they even used the same like stock photos and everything that they had done. It was an identical copy just with the word entertainment underneath it.
Yeah, it definitely didn't run that by his lawyer as to whether that would be a good idea or not.
Oh man.
And I mean, that's where they almost killed the zoo right there because they racked up tons of legal fees. He couldn't afford it anymore. That's where it got personal because she's trying to take his mom's house. Like,
Oh yeah, I forgot that happened.
yeah. And so, and that's where we get introduced to the alleged con man of Jeff Lowe, who is also into owning big cats. And he basically jumps into the fight against Carol on Joe's side. Um, he made it seem like he had a lot of money, but apparently he did not. And he ends up getting Joe to sign the zoo over to his name and all this stuff, and ends up hiring or his friend was the hitman who Joe tried to hire to kill Carol Baskin.
Yeah, so we're introduced to him like he's gonna be a bad guy, but beyond rolling around tiger cubs and like luggage in Vegas, he doesn't really seem to be much worse than everybody else. He didn't like I don't know. It seemed like they were gonna introduce him as this big bad figure, and he was just scummy like everybody else was.
Right. He doesn't seem like he's out, like he didn't run a cult. He didn't get along with Joe that well, but like he doesn't seem like a great person, but it seems like he has his hands in a lot of shady stuff.
Yeah, I mean, the main thing I remember about him is that Joe was stealing his money or like writing checks under his name to fund his congressional or gubernatorial campaign, which is something we haven't even discussed yet.
I'm trying to go like in my memory of episode occurrences because that's like episode 5 or 6 where that happens. But yeah, the biggest thing for Jeff Lowe for me is he dresses like a 14-year-old kid who's really into motocross.
Oh my god, that's exactly what
He's
it
like
is.
50. Yeah, so he comes in. He's not great. That he ends up pushing Joe out of his the zoo, and this is at the time too when the feds are looking into Joe. So while all this is happening, we didn't even touch on it. So Joe is gay. He loves guns. So he is he's in a polygamous relationship with 2 straight men.
Yep.
And it's like basically they say the one of the boyfriends who left him on camera, uh, he basically gave them meth and kept them in a relationship with him. So it was a weird like predatory relationship he definitely had with his 2 husbands.
Oh man, the pictures of the wedding were wild.
Yeah, I mean when they did this too, I don't even know if like gay marriage had been allowed throughout the U.S. So I'm curious if also, well, it couldn't have been valid anyways because I don't think polygamy is valid in any state
It
except
is not.
maybe Utah.
Yeah, I don't know.
I know Utah
Like,
recently had been pushing a bill for it. I don't know if it passed or not, but
I
yeah,
want to know about the woman who was like officiating because she was like, "Oh, we've had our fair share of strange relationships here in the past, but you know, uh, this one might take the cake." And I'm like, "What?"
yeah. What other things did you have going on here?
Yeah,
These are
might
all like
take the
meth
cake.
addicts getting a threesome marriage,
Very weird.
and there's tigers here.
Like that's one of the things about this show is that it gives you really no time to get on its level. From
No,
the jump, it is crazy.
and here's part of the problem. My actual critique I think I have with the film is I think these guys liked Joe, and I think Joe gets a lot, like maybe not an entire pass, but I think he gets a bit of a pass in a lot of his behavior. Like it gets glossed over, like the fact that they do give a segment to be like, oh yeah, he was giving his 2 husbands a lot of meth. They weren't actually in love with him, but they don't like take it a step further as to being like, why that's a kind of a crazy thing to for someone
Yeah.
to do. And where what really sealed the deal of me being like, yeah, Joe's actually probably not that good of a person, and it's a bit of an act. Um, and what I thought was probably the craziest episode was episode 5. Joe's one boyfriend accidentally shoots himself. I don't know actually if it was an accident or a suicide. It seemed a little bit unclear to me, but you don't have the footage, but you have the footage where he does it in the office, and the one guy like who witnesses it, and they have this poor kid's funeral. He's like 24 at this time when he died, in Joe's 50s. Do you remember Joe's speech about the kid? I think his name is Travis.
It was Travis.
He was sitting there just talking about Travis's balls in front of his mom, who's clearly grieving.
Very weird.
And then, which set me off to being like, Joe definitely did not care that much about this guy. They're filming him, and he's like, I'm about to go on my first date since Travis died, guys. And you're like, okay, has it been months? Has it been a year? He's like, this is the baby cub that was born. Like, he points to a cub, and he goes, this is the tiger that was born after the day after Travis died. And their whole thing about cubs is like, you can only have them up to 12 weeks.
Hmm.
So at the most, it had been 12 weeks since Travis died, but then we later find out it was Joe gets remarried within 2 months. So likely like Travis dies and then a week later Joe's making a big deal about going out on a date like 1 to 2 weeks after this dude's death.
Oh yeah, it was real bad.
It was, I mean, he gets married within 2 months to another person, and then he tricks Travis's mom into coming to a small ceremony, so it makes it seem like no one should be mad at him. Like it's really manipulative behavior that they sort of gloss over.
And but I mean, he does build a really nice memorial out of like a defunct ATV.
Well, so the local ATV club built that memorial, though he didn't do it.
Oh well, I missed that.
Because he's like, oh, I was just going to put it on some blocks, but they came out and built this for me, which was nice. So it's just like one of those things like, it seems like he's actually a very manipulative person, and they don't call him on it as much as they probably should.
Yeah, I would agree with that because it's like you said, a lot of the interviews are done with his people. Like you don't really meet any besides that one woman who left Doc Antle's cult. Like you don't really meet any of anyone outside of like Joe's workers.
The biggest thing that I can say is telling is at his trial, pretty much everyone who was close to him was a witness against him.
Yeah, they all rolled on him.
Right. Like there was no loyalty to that level, even his former husband. Like, so that's like one of those things where it's just like, like how close were you really with those people? And I think he probably realized that towards the end. But also, it could be one of those things where it's like these people aren't loyal, but also it could be, he was manipulating these people, and once they were away from the situation and had some retrospective on it, they realized they were being manipulated.
Yeah, they were able to recoup a little bit. Like I uh there was so much in this. Like even they're interviewing him in prison. They have like a phone call with him, I guess. And he's talking about how like the soul dies when it's kept in a cage and it's like, "Yeah, Joe, what do you think you were doing to those tigers all this time?"
Yeah, well, that's the only time that in the movie that it seems like he has some recognition is like in the last episode when he's dealing with getting rid of the two monkeys who seemed happy once they were able to be together.
Yeah.
But who knows when they actually filmed it? Like, was that in 2015, 2017? Like, what state of mind was he in at that time?
Yeah, like it seemed like a lot of people in this documentary were always like inches away from having like a personal revelation and they just couldn't take that last step.
Right. And
I
man,
I also I can also say that I was like 100% on board with like 10% of what people were saying at any given time. Like with Carol where it's like, "Oh, don't exploit the tigers." And I'm like, "Yeah, I'm with you." And then she's like, "Oh, but." And then it's like um oh geez, the drug dealer Mario talking about like these tigers don't really have a habitat in the wild. All we can do is make them as comfortable and as happy as we can. And like, yeah, okay, I'm on board with that. And it's like, but that's not really all that true either. And so it's like I can identify with very little of everything.
right. One of the things that got me was one of the guys who ended up partnering with Jeff Lowe towards the end. He was basically like, look, like these things are endangered. Why aren't we breeding them? And it's like, that's true. These are an endangered species. So you should encourage breeding, but like, why do we encourage breeding for just captivity? Like
Yeah,
you should encourage other measures. Or Doc Antle talking about like the way why you should allow cub petting is the way you get people to care about it is by having them with a tiger. But also he was making money off of it. And is there any study that shows the direct correlation to like someone pets a tiger and then that money actually goes to conservation? Because
yeah.
for the most part, it
There's
seems like it went to running these guys' business.
oh man, what a world! Like this, there. I believe the documentary said at the end that there are more tigers in captivity in the United States than there are everywhere else in the world in the
Yeah,
wild.
which is crazy.
And like I just think about these guys have like 200 tigers at a clip. How can you possibly care for that many tigers?
Oh, I know. It's insane.
Well, on the topic of Carol, did you see her crazy wedding photos
Oh, yes, with the husband on
in
a
like the
chain. Yes.
caveman suit?
Yeah.
Oh
Oh,
boy.
yeah. Speaking of just random things in this is what I wanted to bring up. One of the legitimate funny parts of this, where like Joe Exotic's trolling was funny, was when he made a music video about Carol killing her husband and feeding it to a tiger. I was dying at
Here,
that.
kitty, kitty.
Yes.
He had a Carol lookalike go and like feed meat to his tigers.
Yeah. So we are running a bit long on this. So let's actually get to the part where why Joe Exotic ended up in jail was he solicited one of his workers to pay them to kill Carol. And there's a lot of there, according to Joe, there's a lot of controversy around it, but the government basically got a conviction on him, and they seem to have a lot of audio of him talking about it. So it's one of those things where I don't believe him as much. I'm curious what they've excluded from the documentary.
Well, I love that guy too. I mean, he's the one that they interviewed in the bathtub at the end.
Right?
And he basically they interviewed him and they're like, "Did you take Joe's money to go kill this woman?" He's like, "I took Joe's money and then I drove part of the way there and I decided, yeah, I'm not going to do this." And I went clubbing.
Yeah.
It was like I took his $3,000 down payment and I just went to the strip club and had a good old time. And I'm like, these people.
In Joe's whole defense is he's like Jeff Lowe and that guy. I can't remember his names. I think it was I can't remember a name, but he's like they came in and they're lying about this. Like I never did that. But also you have James there who they never really address as to why he would lie, and he was like wearing a wire for a long time before any of them. Like so this was going on for a while. Even all of his workers were like, oh, we talked about it all the time. And it's just like one of those things where it's like one day he's a little high on meth and he's like, yeah, we're doing it this time. You know, like it's one of those things where I don't think it's a stretch to be like, yeah, I could see him taking the extra step.
Yeah, for sure. I don't really know who James was.
He was the big guy who was one of the
Yeah, like
investors.
I remember him, but
Mm.
I don't know. And I know he was wearing a wire, but like I don't know where he came into in the story. Like what was his deal? Why was he involved with them?
So how he got involved was he is a local businessman of, it appears, pawn shops and strip clubs and jet ski riding.
Yeah, that's
And
oh boy.
what happened was Jeff Lowe wanted to come in and basically save the park from Carol Baskin's lawsuit. And to do so, they needed another investor. And Joe and James had, I think James explained it like they were friendly, but they weren't friends, but they knew each other. And he liked having big cats too. So they talked him into coming in, investing part of his money into the
Okay.
GW Zoo.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, and they had that amazing closing shot of him riding the jet ski with the sunglasses.
Out, yeah. Also, during all of this, we've mentioned it in the backdrop of like the year before this happened. Joe Exotic ran as a libertarian for president and as a libertarian for governor, and there's like an entire episode about his gubernatorial race. Just so
And
much happens in this.
and in running for governor, he managed to get 19% of the vote.
That's why I think that had to have been a primary.
I honestly don't know.
I didn't look into
Like
it, but I was thinking it was a primary that he got 19%. But who knows? If he got 19% in general election, that's insane.
I mean, it almost had to have been a general if he was a libertarian. It's not like he would have been in the Democratic primary.
Well, I imagine he would have been like he was running in a Republican primary, and they just put like, oh, this
Oh
is
yeah, I
like
guess.
his. But you're right. Maybe it was a Libertarian primary. I don't know.
I did laugh pretty hard about when they said he's running as a libertarian. I don't think he knows what a libertarian is.
Oh yeah, he definitely didn't.
That was a fantastic line from somebody. But this is how I knew about him before this. Now, if you'd have asked me, I don't know if I would have been able to bring this from the depths of my memory, but they show in the documentary the clip of him where they talk about him on not Stephen Colbert. They talk about him on John Oliver Last Week Tonight, and as soon as they showed that, I remembered seeing him on there because I watched that show pretty regularly, and I was like, "Oh my god, it's this guy!"
Yeah, I think I might have seen that clip back in 2016. But what I actually remember him from, and they bring this up briefly, is I grew up pretty close to Zanesville, Ohio, and
Mm-hmm.
I remember I think it was 2011 or whatever. I was in college at the time when the guy released all of his animals around Zanesville and they had to put them all down, which was a pretty sad event. And that's when it's like, wow, a guy had 76 bears, and tigers, which is apparently nothing compared to Joe Exotic and Duck Animal.
Hmm.
But I remember that happening, and then I remember the clip of him being like, "If anyone comes to try and take my tigers, it's gonna be another Waco." I actually remember that clip going around the internet back then. And I was like, "Oh, that's that guy." I'm like, I remember that.
Yeah, I had kind of no memory of the Zanesville incident. I couldn't believe when they were talking about that.
Yeah, I mean, I just remember because you grow up close to it, and you're like, "Oh, I played their school in sports and stuff," so you're like,
Yeah.
"Ah, huh, weird." Yeah, so Joe goes to jail, and then he turns on all the other like big cat owners and has apparently been like feeding PETA and the FBI just tons of inside information, which has led to the arrest or the investigation, at least, of Doc Antle. They raided his house in December of 2019.
Yeah, I do think it's funny that he spent all that time going up against PETA and now he's like their best friend.
Right. Weird
He turned
frenemies.
informant.
Yeah. Okay. Is there anything that we missed on that, Christian? We're at 42 minutes.
Yeah, I mean probably.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
No, I mean I think the best way I can sum this up is I saw a tweet and it said that Tiger King is so crazy that by the time the last episode rolls around, they show a guy driving around with a skeleton riding shotgun, and the show doesn't feel it necessary to explain it to me, and I never question it.
Yeah. I mean, I think I texted you. I was like, Christian, you got to watch this. It's insane. And that's the only way I can describe this documentary. I highly recommend our audience check this out. It is so entertaining.
I do too, with one caveat. I watched this in one sitting. I went through all 7 hours in one go. Do not do that. That is a mistake. I could not sleep that night. I finished it at like 3:30 in the morning. I went to bed and I could not sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I just saw John Finley's toothless smile. It was haunting.
All right, and now for our next segment, Christian, GameStop has been in the news a lot over the past couple weeks, and not for good reasons. Apart from their general bad business practices and the company just dying because physical sales of video games and big box stores are slowly dying, GameStop has had a hard time dealing with the pandemic. They've had a corporate mandate basically claiming that their managers need to claim that they're an essential business if any state tries to shut them down, which
Oh,
has been,
Lord.
I mean, I feel bad for the managers, but it's also hilarious that GameStop is trying to claim that they're essential over the past couple weeks. So I just wanted to talk about them a little bit because I really think this is the last gasp of GameStop, and they're going to go bankrupt soon.
Yeah, it sure seems like they're heading that way. That seems to be the trajectory.
So on a base level, I think GameStop could make an argument that they are an essential business because let me preface this actually. I think there's a way for corporations that sell electronics to say that they're an essential business. They're basically saying like, look, everyone's moving to work at home. You need equipment to get set up. Some people need monitors, mouses, keyboards, routers, whatever. And they're like, look, we're in electronics. We are an essential business. What GameStop fails in their legal argument, if anyone looks into it, is they're not really known for selling any of those accessories. They sell video games and video game accessories. I mean, in the past few years, I think they might have completely phased out their PC section of gaming. Like, you can't buy PC games there anymore. I don't know if you can buy keyboards. Like, maybe you can get a keyboard, mouse, and headset, but that's about the extent.
I mean,
So,
granted, I'm in a small town. We had two GameStops for a while. For sure, at no point when I went into either one of them did I ever see any like computer equipment. I've never seen speakers, I've never seen mouses, I've never seen keyboards, never seen monitors. I've seen PlayStation, Xbox, and Switch stuff, and Funko Pop figurines, and that's more or less it.
I mean, so they used to have at least keyboards and mouses, if I'm remembering it. But this might have been early 2000s Christian when I'm remembering this, because
Mm.
it's been a long time since I've seen it, and they've really transitioned to be on top of video games. Like they said, well, they do sell cell phones now, but I don't know if you can consider that essential. They do like trade-ins for that, but you're right. It's like Funko, like gamer gear, that kind of stuff in the video games. And if they're like, look, we're going to reposition and we're putting all the more essential stuff up front, I could see it. But if you go to their website right now, which I'm doing, I will tell you what the first thing that they're advertising is, and it's the Nintendo Switch and video games. You have to scroll down, and then it's like, okay, you can get an HP monitor on the front page of, more than 20 different clickable things. The HP monitor is the only thing that you would consider an essential electronic right now.
Yeah, I agree. Like if they were gonna try and pivot and become like an electronics supplier, sure, go ahead and be an essential business. If you're gonna pivot and move your business model to being, monitors and webcams and whatever, like if you're gonna essentially change from just gaming to being gaming and like teleworking,
Mm-hmm.
then sure. Like if you can go ahead and you can sell all the stuff people need to get on to Zoom or whatever else for their internet meetings. But yeah, I mean the Switch, as fun as it is not an essential service to humanity.
Right? I mean, I would assume they sell webcams, but I have no idea, honestly, Christian. Like, they're one of those that are hard to classify. So that's why I could see Best Buy making that argument, or
Oh yeah, for
like
sure. No
Staples or
problem.
something like that. It's like, okay, you're right. Like, while people transition, uh, the shipping industry is obviously taking a hit on all this. Like, it's not business as usual. So they do serve a value, if they take precautions and things like that. But GameStop, I mean, clearly this is being done because they're in trouble business wise, because they've been closing down stores. And after basically governors have been like, no, you having your store managers giving us like a business card with a website link does not mean you're an essential business. They have 5,500 stores in the country. They closed. They're shutting down 300 of them, like it was announced this week. So I mean, they're taking a hit because not only are people buying stuff digital now, people aren't even coming into their store.
Yeah.
I really think I mean, I think they're really going to rely on the new console generation to give them a couple more years. I think the pandemic might kill them. I don't know if they survive 2020.
Yeah, I mean it would be the end of an era. I mean you hate to see another business go, but I'm sure you're probably right. The situation was not looking great to begin with, and now with this additional hit, that might just be too much all at once.
And yeah, and it's easy to rag on GameStop because I love video games, Christian. I hate going into GameStop so much, and it sucks because I used to like going into EB Games. Like GameStop used to be okay
Oh
when
man,
I
EB
would go in
games.
there. Like people would not bug me. I go
Yeah.
in there now, and I don't begrudge the salespeople for doing it, because I know that their bosses and their bosses are all putting pressure on sales. But when you come up to me and I like, I go in there and I browse and I buy a game because I'm like, oh, I've heard this was cool. I don't want someone hard selling me. If I know what I'm getting, I don't probably go into GameStop to buy it. I'm not buying a new game at GameStop because they unwrap all their new games and it infuriates me. Like I'm ordering it on Amazon. I go into
Hmm.
GameStop to browse their used games. And since they started pushing sales tactics, I just stopped going in because I don't want to talk to people. I don't want them to be like, "What are you playing now?" Blah blah blah. Like, I don't like that, and it bugs me. And I can't imagine that I'm the only one who that has turned off. Which I am their core audience. And what do you get from it is like maybe you upsell a mom on something, but other than
Yeah.
that, like you're driving away actual people who like I like to own the video game box and stuff. I like that, but they've turned me away from it because I hate going in there. And my only other option is a local game store, which is pretty good for like a used game store, but they don't have the best selection. Or else, like I can go to Target or Walmart, which are generally overpriced. So I just go to Amazon now, or I buy digitally.
Yeah. I'll tell you what that reminds me of is Radio Shack.
Oh, really? I see. I never used to go there.
See, I was in and out because for a little while I was real into like building electronics. Like I was doing circuits and soldering and stuff, and so I would go in there because they're the only people that sold electronics components. And for a long time, it was just, if you need anything, let us know. And like, all right, I'm just gonna look in these drawers full of resistors for a while. But when I started, I worked at Radio Shack for about 6 or 8 months. And when I started there, it was the beginning of their like, we're probably going to close. And they were like doing their last gasps. And man, we had to hard sell everything.
And that's not fun. That's the problem. Is like it's not fun for the salespeople, and it's not fun for the customers.
Nope. Yeah, like people wandered in and they're like, I want a pair of headphones. And we're like, have you seen our cell phone department?
Right.
Do you need a new television? And it's like, no, I want a pair of 99-cent headphones. I'm like, how about you can get those headphones for free if we attach them as an accessory to this new Samsung phone? And they're like, I'm going to go.
That's the thing is I'm curious if there's some data somewhere where they're like, we need to stay in business for this much longer, but really you'd be better served trying to transition your business. Like GameStop has talked about transitioning their business, but it's too little too late at this point. They've already
Yeah.
lost tons of their core base. And I do feel a little bit bad because in a lot of parts of the country, GameStop's the only game store in town. Like my hometown, there's only GameStop, or you have to go to Walmart or whatever. But it's not the same. You don't have used games. So if it's not a popular game or it's a game that came out 5 years ago, you might not be able to find it.
Yeah, that's essentially how it is here too. Like we have, I think, two little shops that are essentially just kind of closet sized, and they have used games, and but that's about it. There's really nothing else, and it's like you were saying that the selection is not exactly going to be anything to write home about.
Yeah, the one near us it's I think more focused on retro games, so they have some of the more recent ones, but there's I don't know what the PlayStation's cat like how big the catalog is, but it's in the thousands, and they'll have like 50 titles or whatever, and it's always the more
Yeah.
popular one. So if you're looking for something a little more niche, it's harder to find, which is disappointing. That was the one good thing GameStop had is like you would sometimes find hidden gems, which was awesome.
Hmm.
Or you would go and you'd pick a game up on a whim, and then it's just like, okay, like cool, I really enjoyed this and I wasn't expecting it. All right, Christian. Before we go to the Amazon review game and finish up, what have you been binge watching during the quarantine, or binge, I guess, consuming if you've been playing video games?
Tiger King.
Yeah, right.
um, no, I watched a movie from several years ago that missed our theater, but I always thought it looked interesting, called Secret in Their Eyes. I'll probably do an article for our website about it. It was not super good. Um, Other than that, I started BioShock for the first time. I'm not good at it. I'm in fact very bad at it. It's stressful.
Yeah.
I didn't really know what to expect from BioShock. I'd heard various things over the years, and everybody said it's really really good. And I do think I'm gonna like it if I can get past these first couple stages and maybe get better at shooting things and not just wildly blasting into the dark screen. I also downloaded Uncharted. It was the one of the PlayStation free games of the month in the past month or two. So I finally downloaded. I think it's the first 3 Uncharted games.
Oh yeah, the
I'm
collection.
excited to try those. I've been playing through Horizon Zero Dawn again because it makes me feel like I'm outside. And it's one of the only games that I feel like I'm really, really good at, and so that helps pass the time.
I will say on Uncharted, I only played 1 and 2. They are very similar gameplay wise. So if you're like, I only have one game in me to get into it, two is the best of the 3 in my opinion. Well, granted, I didn't play the third one, but of the first two I think is better.
Sweet.
Uncharted is cool because it's a very Indiana Jones feel, and then halfway through it takes a turn I was not expecting. So it was really cool surprise.
Yeah, I may lay off BioShock for a little while and try that instead because I'm profoundly bad at BioShock so far.
Yeah, I bought the BioShock collection when it came out because I always heard about how good BioShock was, but I don't think the first one ever came to the PlayStation. So I was like, I'll play it. I got like 30% ish through it and I just fell off. I don't know. I think because I heard so much hype for it, it's one of those things where I was like, maybe I need to play this back when it came out in the 2000s.
Yeah, this was another one that was it was BioShock 1 and 2 were the free game of the month. I think
Yeah.
maybe back in January.
It's a
And
good
so
collection for like a free PSN game, though.
yeah, absolutely. But I've just had them sitting undownloaded on my PlayStation for however many months now. And so I was like, well, I'm not doing anything else. I may as well.
Yeah. So for me, I've been basically just have had The Office on in the background while I've been working for the past week. My goal is to because I watched The Office when it aired, and I've rewatched like the second season a fair number of times, but the second season is my favorite of the seasons, so I've not really watched seasons 3 through 9 since they've aired. Uh, and I know I hated seasons 8 and 9, so I don't know if I'll rewatch those. But I'm going to at least finish the Michael Scott stuff. It's an easy show to have on in the background. I don't have to pay attention to it.
It definitely is.
Brooklyn Nine-Nine, I did not realize was releasing new episodes. They started in January, so I caught up on that. They've been a good season so far. And a new show on FX called Dave. It is by Lil Dicky, who's a internet rapper. It's actually really funny, but I think you have to be a fan of a certain type of humor. But I think Dave's actually pretty funny. So I would suggest checking that out if you watch a couple of his music videos and you think he's funny. It's like for fans of his, I think.
I'm gonna say something controversial.
Mm-hmm.
I think season 9 of The Office is its best year.
Are you serious?
Yes.
Christian, you're so wrong. I'm sorry.
Oh man, I don't like Michael, and so there's no Michael. I don't like Ryan, and there's no Ryan. I don't like Kelly, and there's no Kelly. There's very little Andy. It's perfect.
Wow, you have a very specific office taste, man.
I guess I do. Like, I love Jim and Dwight, and I love Pam and Creed, and like it's just it has everybody I like, and not many of the people that I don't.
I have never heard anyone have that take. The strongest I've heard before is people were like, "Yeah, season 9 is not that bad."
I think season 9 is almost perfect.
Oh, well, that's amazing. Um, Otherwise, I've just been playing Divinity Original Sin 2 some more. I'm about 48, 50 hours into it right now. I put in like a little over 20 hours this week, and I'm maybe close to 70% through my first playthrough, so I'll be excited to finish that up. It's really fun. But yeah, that's pretty much everything. All right, guys, and now it's time for our Amazon review game. Just a quick recap of the rules. I have a 5-star review for a movie from Amazon, and I will read the review. Christian will get 2 yes or no questions to help him narrow down the movie. If he cannot get it on those 2, he can ask for another review. He will get 2 more yes or no questions, can ask for a third review, and 2 more yes or no questions, then he has to guess. If he gets it on the first guess, he'll get 3 points, 2 points for the second guess, 1 point for the third guess, and we are keeping score for the year. Christian, are you ready?
I am ready.
This is one of the best animated movies ever. This little gem from director Brad Bird was the critics' darling, and mine too, when it first came out. Unfortunately, it was not seen by a lot of people. Over the years, though, it has built up quite a following.
Brad Bird. Did this movie come out in the last 5 years?
No.
Ooh. Is this a comedy?
I would say there's comedic elements, but you would not classify this as a comedy.
Ooh. I'm gonna need another review.
Okay. This is a very different film from the usual CGI cartoons like Toy Story or Shrek. It doesn't try for any realism, it just accepts it's a cartoon and gets on with the story. It's also set in the 50s when Sputnik had just gone up and the world was a very different place, so this adds a nice touch. At first, I thought the story was a bit simplistic, but after 2 or 3 watches, my 4-year-old was watching it on continuous. It grew on me, and it's now a film I'll watch even if my son isn't around. I particularly like the 50s flavor of innocence, and the characters are well drawn too, especially the super cool scrapyard owner and the evil FBI agent. From the educational point of view, the film makes a strong point about violence begetting violence, but does it in a fairly subtle way that kids will absorb without feeling they are being lectured. There's also eventually a happy ending, but sorry, by this you won't be disappointed, but give it a chance. Don't just dismiss it because it doesn't have all the CGI effects of a blockbuster movie.
I had it from 50s.
Uh,
Iron Giant.
yes, it is the Iron Giant.
I love this movie.
I had assumed you had seen it just because it's. I feel like they played it a lot when we were kids.
Oh yeah, I have it on Blu-ray, I think.
Yeah, the Iron Giant's good.
Vin Diesel.
I was gonna say, did he do the voice or did I make that up as someone
Yeah,
joking about it?
yeah, that's definitely him. They said that's how he got hired for Groot, was they wanted somebody who had like a high emotional range without really saying anything.
I saw a stat the other day, and I don't know if it's real. It was like a Reddit heading, and I didn't look into it. But Vin Diesel is apparently part of like 10% of the billion-dollar movies like ever made, which
Oh
kind of
my
makes sense
god.
because he's been in like Guardians and the Avengers, and Fast and Furious makes a ton of money.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I don't know what else Triple X or Return of Xander Cage probably doesn't make the cut, but
Oh man, what a good movie.
all right, guys, thanks for listening to our episode. If you would like to contact us, we're at Gambots Network on Twitter, or you can email us. We are gambots.blog@gmail.com. We also have a website now. It's gambotsnetwork.com, where we have some written reviews for stuff we either talk about on the show or we don't get a chance to, or we go a little bit more in depth. Like Christian recently wrote an Outbreak article. Also, if you're listening somewhere where you could rate us, we'd appreciate it as that helps with our rankings. Otherwise, thanks for tuning in, guys.
Thank you.